All right, we're talking criminal guys here. So we're looking only at guys who actually served prison time. We're going to rule out guys who committed crimes but served no time for them, like dead guy Marty Bergen, who killed his family with an axe but then ended his own life, thus avoiding jail time. And home arrest isn't counting for this, so we can rule out guys like Raul Mondesi, who was convicted of embezzling $5 million while acting as the mayor of San Cristobal in the Dominican Republic, but served the whole sentence from home. And since we just did cocaine guys, we're going to exclude anyone who did time on drug charges. And just a heads up that while, as usual with the Guys series, we're trying to have fun here, but this one leads into some quite disturbing subject matter. You've been warned. Catcher, Bill Wilson. Baseball Wilson has got to be the most purely criminal guy on this team. By and large, we're not talking about guys who chose a life of crime here. Most of the guys on this team are guys who maybe made a youthful mistake or got greedy and made a misguided financial decision, or who were sick, unstable people. But Bill Wilson is different. He was a catcher and first baseman for more than a decade in professional baseball, playing 3 seasons in the majors in the late 1890s. After baseball, with no other viable skills, Wilson embraced the criminal underworld. Starting with petty theft, Wilson eventually worked his way up to the theft of postal money orders, a federal offense. In 1909, he was sentenced to 2 years in Leavenworth Penitentiary, and multiple disciplinary infractions there led his sentence to be maxed out. Even though he was a problem prisoner, guards let him keep a baseball bat that had been sent to him. It has been speculated that this kindness by guards is what led to the beginning of recreational prison baseball. There will be more on this later. After his release from prison, Wilson started associating with the criminal underworld, most notably the Purple Gang, which was the most prominent gang in Detroit during Prohibition. His street name became Baseball Wilson, and he met his demise in a speakeasy in St. Paul, Minnesota, where he was stabbed 10 times. It was written in the local press that, quote, no tears were shed for Baseball Wilson, for if he had a friend among the handful of persons who attended his funeral, that friend restrained his or her emotion with admirable stoicism. Baseball Wilson lived hard and died hard. See, crime doesn't pay, kids. First base, Pete Rose. Pete's crimes against baseball are well documented, but just a year after the shocking news of his baseball gambling scandal, he was faced with tax evasion charges when the IRS told him he needed to be reporting his income from selling autographs and memorabilia, and Pete was like, huh? He served 5 months at a minimum security prison. Second base, Jerry Priddy. Jerry Priddy was a very solid second baseman for 11 MLB seasons in the 1940s and 50s. After his career was cut short due to injury at age 34, Priddy embarked on a wildly eventful and eventually tragic post-baseball career. First, he tried to make it in Hollywood. He worked as an advisor on the biopic The Winning Team, with Ronald Reagan playing Grover Cleveland Alexander. The film used stock footage of Babe Ruth throughout its depiction of the 1926 World Series, but one newly shot sequence featured Priddy playing the Babe, with a pillow stuffed under his shirt. He had small parts in 3 other baseball-themed films, and also appeared on a 1954 episode of the Colgate Comedy Hour, which means he may have shared the stage with legends such as Roy Donk and... who's the other guy?
Paul Bufano! Paul Bufano! How hard is that?
Oh, that's right. He ran a paper wholesaling company in the 60s and then a PR agency in the early 70s. I guess neither of these endeavors worked out too well because one day in 1973, he picked up the phone and called the Princess Cruise Lines and told them there were bombs on board their ship, the Island Princess, which was on its way to Mexico. He said he would reveal the location of the bombs if paid $250,000. He set up a drop at a garbage can in LA, and when he went to pick up the money, FBI agents arrested him. He was sentenced to just 9 months in prison for this extortion scheme. It could have been up to 20 years, but the judge gave the much more lenient sentence after receiving dozens of letters from former ballplayers, as well as Hollywood types, including Bob Hope and Gene Autry. He was released from Terminal Island after 4.5 months. Third base, Pinky Higgins. Higgins was a consistently solid third baseman in the 30s and 40s who is probably most known as being the Red Sox manager in the 50s and 60s, and considered by many Red Sox historians to be one of the main reasons for Boston's long refusal to integrate its Major League ball club. The Red Sox were the last MLB team to integrate when Pumpsie Green was called up in 1959. The singling out of Higgins seems to be a bit of a stretch though, as Higgins had no say over personnel decisions until he became manager in 1955. So clearly this policy had been in place already under the leadership of owner Tom Yawkey and GM Joe Cronin. So perhaps Higgins was a bit of a scapegoat in this regard, but he did have a reputation as a vile racist. The Sox' first two black players, Green and Earl Wilson, spoke of a palpable disgust they felt when they dealt directly with Higgins. And in 1959, after Green had batted .400 in spring training, then GM Bucky Harris said that Green had made the team. But Higgins allegedly went to Yawkey and had Harris overruled, saying this, according to reporter Al Hirschberg. Higgins would stay on as manager through 1962 and then as general manager until 1965. Higgins was a heavy drinker and his main drinking buddy was Tom Yawkey, which led many to the conclusion that this was his primary qualification for his powerful role with the team, a team that had been getting worse and worse from the late 50s into the mid-60s. His drinking would eventually turn criminal in 1968 in Louisiana when he killed one and injured two while driving drunk. He was sentenced to 4 years of hard labor at Louisiana State Penitentiary. Higgins was so distraught by his actions that he lost 30 to 40 pounds and suffered 2 heart attacks between his conviction and his sentencing in 1969. He was paroled after just 2 months, but suffered another heart attack and died 48 hours after his release. Shortstop, Billy Geer. Geer had a pretty unremarkable career as a shortstop in the 1870s and 1880s, but had a very remarkable post-baseball career as a check forger. Geer could be compared to Baseball Wilson as a guy who chose a life of crime, but Geer never got involved with organized crime. He remained independent for over 30 years, committed to a Frank Abagnale Jr.-esque forgery career. Geer served prison terms in Minnesota, Virginia, Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. He never thought twice about going right back to the same racket, passing bad checks under various aliases. He died shortly after being paroled from a Missouri prison in 1928. Left field. In left, we're going to go with a platoon of 2 guys whose baseball careers started in prison, Ron LeFlore and Jim Rivera. You could say that if Baseball Wilson doesn't go to Leavenworth Penitentiary in 1909 and inspire the creation of prison yard baseball, maybe we don't get these 2 big leaguers. Ron LeFlore had a rough upbringing in Detroit in the 1950s and 60s. He was a high school dropout and heroin addict who had first been arrested at 15 years old. In 1970, at age 22, LeFlore took part in an armed robbery of a local bar and was sentenced to 5 to 15 years at Jackson State Penitentiary, which is where LeFlore would play in an organized baseball league for the first time in his life. A fellow inmate convinced a friend of Billy Martin, then Tigers manager, to come visit to take a look at LeFlore. Martin visited in '73 and helped LeFlore get a day parole to try out at Tiger Stadium. The Tigers signed him to a contract and helped get him paroled. Amazingly, he would debut with the Tigers just a year later in August of '74. He'd develop into an all-star center fielder by 1976 and go on to a very solid 9-year career before drugs would drag him down once again after his coke-fueled 97 steal season with the Expos in 1980. He'd be traded to the White Sox where he'd struggle. And in 1982, his home was raided by narcotics agents who found amphetamines and quaaludes as well as 2 unregistered guns. Even though LeFlore would be acquitted, this would essentially end his career. But it's hard not to look at LeFlore's rise to baseball stardom as a successful bit of American prisoner rehabilitation, a rare situation where prison allows the development of skills to help adapt to life on the outside, versus the cycle of punishment and recidivism that generally prevails. You could make the same case for our left-handed side of this platoon, except that, well, maybe this guy shouldn't have been rehabilitated. Manuel Jim Rivera also had a rough upbringing, growing up in an orphanage. While serving in the U.S. Army Air Corps in 1944, Jim Rivera was charged by the Army with assaulting and attempting to rape the daughter of an officer. He was court-martialed and sentenced to life in prison. While playing on the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary baseball team, Word of his baseball talent got around to the owner of minor league team, the Atlanta Crackers. The team owner worked to secure a parole for Rivera after he had served just 5 years of that life sentence. In 1951, he'd be traded by the White Sox to the St. Louis Browns, where he would make his major league debut. But civic and religious groups in St. Louis objected and began a campaign to push the Browns to cut Rivera and to try to get MLB to ban him from the game. He played 97 games there before being dealt back to the White Sox. In response to the controversy in St. Louis, Commissioner Ford Frick said that, quote, "Since Rivera came into baseball, his conduct has been beyond question. If in the future he shows that he has not profited by his experience, this office will take action." Well, on the final day of the 1952 season, Rivera was once again arrested, once again for rape. Rivera contended it was a consensual encounter, and after he passed a lie detector test, everybody was just like, okay, cool, let's just forget all about it. And Rivera was able to enjoy a 10-year career as a solid outfielder and fan favorite for the Go-Go White Sox of the 1950s. But then there's this disturbing document I came across while researching this segment that adds some even darker shades to an already murky picture. I found this on the Digital Commons at Lindenwood University website, and it came from the archives of the Sporting News from 1952. It appears to be a bit of correspondence. From or to whom, it doesn't say. But since it's described as an investigation report on Manuel Jim Rivera regarding rape charges and whether he should be allowed to continue playing professional baseball, it feels like it could be coming from the commissioner's office. What's disturbing about this is not just the seemingly casual brushing off of serious allegations by the doctors brought on to examine Rivera, but also the revelation that there appears to be a third allegation of sexual misconduct, this time possibly with a minor. This third incident is not mentioned anywhere else online as far as I can tell. I didn't see it on Wikipedia or on the Society for American Baseball Research website, or in all but one of the news articles I found on Rivera. The one mention of it does come from the Sporting News in the October 8th, 1952 edition. In talking about the 1952 rape allegations, it briefly mentions that after Rivera's release from prison, during the initial 90-day probation period with the Atlanta Crackers, he was, quote, linked with an incident involving violation of the moral code, but it was never substantiated. And what does that mean, moral code? Well, from this correspondence, we can make some guesses. It says that one of the elements of the investigation was a, quote, further interrogation of the father of the lad who was involved in the incident at Atlanta. Then it contains a quote from Dr. Frank F. Tallman, the Commissioner of Mental Health of the state of California, who says, quote, "It is my considered professional opinion that this one episode came as a result of a great deal of stress, combined with an immature feeling that he was doing very well and could therefore do as he pleased." Okay. The fact that his rebellion took the form of sexual advance to the boy, I attribute to his repressions during his life in the orphanage and in prison. I mean, there's a whole lot of context missing here, but it does sound like they're talking about him engaging in sexual misconduct with a minor, and they sure seem eager to sweep this under the rug, promising young man style. Tallman goes on, saying, "In other words, his growing conviction that he was going to have a chance to be a great ball player uncorked the bottle of past repressions too suddenly, and the explosion was one of immaturity." Keep in mind, Rivera would have been 27 or 28 at the time of this alleged incident. In conclusion, I think we can safely say that Rivera's maturity is now such that this type of behavior is a thing of the past. And as I said before, I would see no contraindication for his continuing professional baseball in any capacity that his ability merits. And his analysis concludes with this confusing section. At first, I assumed they were referring to the lad or boy involved in the sexual advance by Rivera, but after reading this several times, it appears to be referring here to Rivera as a boy, a 30-year-old boy. I should like to point out, too, that the boy, having been fatherless for so long, tends to look up for guidance and affection from older people, and if the coach of any group that he joins takes a more or less fatherly interest in him, the accuracy of my prognostication will be doubly ensured. So I did also find reference to this incident in this transcript of a radio address by a St. Louis reverend protesting Rivera's time with the Browns. This section is interesting as it has a redacted line. "Recently I had dinner with a minister from Atlanta, where Rivera once played, and he advised me that his conduct, and here's where it's redacted, but if you look closely, it sure does look like it says against youngsters here. Hearsay, obviously, so I don't know, but it does make you wonder if the MLB commissioner engaged in a cover-up of this player's behavior. Oh, and also, Rivera was once again arrested in 1982 for molesting a 14-year-old girl, and once again, charges were dropped after Rivera took a lie detector test. Center field, Lenny Dykstra. Reading through the legal issues section on Lenny Dykstra's Wikipedia page feels like watching Uncut Gems. The anxiety of witnessing a degenerate dude dig his own grave. There's a lot going on with his legal troubles, but the things that led to his 15 months in prison in 2012 and 2013 were bankruptcy fraud, money laundering, and grand theft auto. Apparently his financial woes all started when Lenny bought the Thousand Oaks mansion of Wayne Gretzky in 2007 for $18.5 million, intending to flip it. After mounting debts, Dykstra would lose the home to foreclosure after filing for bankruptcy in 2009. Well, as Wayne says, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. In 2018, Wayne would buy the house back for just $13.5 mil.
This is me. This is how I win.
Right field, Mel Hall. There's a lot of creeps on this team, and few are more creepy than Mel Hall, who is currently serving a 45-year prison sentence for raping a 12-year-old girl. Hall had a long history of preying on underage girls that he coached in basketball or softball. This photo of a 30-year-old Hall with a high school girl at her prom is skin-crawling on its own. But what's worse is that this pic appeared in the 1991 New York Yankees team yearbook, in a section showing players and their significant others. Only cool thing you can say about Mel Hall is that his personal bodyguard during his playing days was Jimmy McMillan, who you may know as this guy.
The rent is too damn high. I'm Jimmy McMillan, 2013. I'm running for mayor. Come and run with me because the rent is too damn high.
Ah, that's a bit of a timeline cleanse. DH, Chad Curtis, god damn it. Okay, back into the muck here with Curtis, who was most known during his career for this dramatic walk-off homer in Game 3 of the 1999 World Series.
To be honest with you, what they told me was that they were happy it happened to me because they thought I was a nice guy and I deserved something like that.
Smarm City. Curtis had a reputation as sort of a baseball Ned Flanders. He was a Bible thumper who claimed he never swore, never drank, never committed adultery. But we found out in 2012 that he did have one vice, committing habitual sexual assault against minors. Like Hall, Curtis found his victims while coaching youth sports. In 2012, Curtis was charged with 6 counts of criminal sexual conduct against girls at Lakewood High School in Michigan. After he was found guilty on all 6 counts, Curtis gave an hour-long statement in court where he alleged that all his accusers were lying, claiming that they made unwelcome sexual advances toward him. Curtis served 7 years in prison before being paroled in 2020. Rotation, Denny McLain. Okay, let's get back to some more wholesome crime. Mafia shit. Denny McLain had one hell of a downfall after his 30-win heights in 1968. And like many downfalls, it begins with drug addiction. In this case, Pepsi.
I got fired by my boss, Pepsi.
McLain was notorious for drinking a case of Pepsi every day, knocking them back between innings. When this info became public, a Pepsi representative offered an endorsement deal to McLain. During their talks, Denny and this rep realized that they shared an affinity for gambling, and they decided instead of just losing money gambling, they should make money taking bets, and so they set up their own illegal bookmaking operation. Nobody talks about the dangers of Pepsi as a gateway drug, but be careful out there, kids. Pepsi's no joke.
Leading helpless teens astray, Pepsi.
But McLain was already beginning his downfall by the time the Pepsi Corporation got its claws in him. SI reported that McLain's mysterious 1967 foot injury that possibly cost the Tigers the pennant was caused by a mafia goon who stomped on McLain's foot for failing to pay his gambling debts. McLain would face multiple suspensions during his playing days, but wouldn't face jail time until his retirement. He tried a number of legitimate business avenues, a big screen TV business, a bar, a line of walk-in medical clinics, none of which were successful, and he filed for bankruptcy in 1977. After making a living for a while as a golf hustler, McLain went back to bookmaking and loan sharking. He was convicted of racketeering, extortion, and cocaine trafficking in 1984, but the verdict was thrown out on procedural grounds. At some point in time, McLain also modeled for Hanes underwear, even though his weight had ballooned to 330 pounds due to his continued Pepsi addiction. I couldn't find any of these ads online, but that seems like some surprising body positivity for the 80s. McLain would finally pay the piper in 1995 after he bought a meatpacking company and proceeded to raid the company's pension fund to the tune of $3 million. He was convicted of embezzlement, money laundering, mail fraud, and conspiracy, and served 7 years in prison.
And my mind just turns to Pepsi, and I couldn't tell you why.
Jerry Koosman. Mets hero Jerry Koosman faced 6 months in federal prison in 2009 for tax evasion. Apparently, Koos had gone down the rabbit hole of sovereign citizen ideology, an anti-tax and anti-government movement based on magical thinking and misinformation about common law, which leads adherents to claim to not be subject to government taxation, or really any sorts of laws.
I do not have to have a driver's license to drive a car.
You said you weren't driving?
Correct. I'm traveling. And I know y'all don't like to play by the real rules, but I already know them.
Not surprisingly, this movement has roots in white supremacy and Christian nationalism. It grew out of the Posse Comitatus, a far-right movement from the 1960s that believed they were the true Israelites, chosen by God. They claimed that Satan, with an assist from the Jews, helped to undermine white citizens' rights through the Federal Reserve and the IRS. And the Posse Comitatus grew out of the Silver Shirts, which were a straight-up fascist organization of Hitler-loving Americans. To be fair, the sovereign citizen ideology has more recently been adopted by people of all races, because everyone's insane now. Much of the sovereign citizen pseudo-legal case for not paying their taxes is the so-called straw man theory. This basically says that you are two different people, your paper identity, i.e. your straw man, and your true self. So you just have to separate your true self from your straw man, and you become free from the rule of law. And you can do whatever the hell you want. This basically sounds like if you just dissociate hard enough, you magically don't owe taxes. So how do sovereign citizens actually achieve this separation of self and straw man? Well, scams. Yeah, basically scams. Jerry Koosman was quoted as saying, "I guess it's a combination of being naive and not being able to understand law as I read it or was told." Pat Jarvis. Pat Jarvis was a pretty good starter for the Braves in the 60s and early 70s who decided to run for sheriff of DeKalb County in Georgia in 1976. As a popular Braves player, he won easily and stayed in office for almost 20 years. But DeKalb County's sheriff's office was a hotbed of corruption. Back in 1972, the sheriff had been convicted of bribery. The next guy, Ray Bonner, was then indicted on charges of misrepresenting a fundraising company, although those charges were dropped. But then, in 1977, he was indicted for shooting and killing a 16-year-old boy who was attempting to play a prank on Bonner's teenage son. He was acquitted. So, for 19 years, Jarvis seemed to have cleaned things up. But a federal investigation after his 1995 retirement revealed that Jarvis had received as much as $200,000 in kickbacks. He would plead guilty to mail fraud and serve a 15-month sentence. The DeKalb County Sheriff's Office would get even more scandalous a decade later when Sheriff Sidney Dorsey was sentenced to life for ordering the murder of the man who'd just beaten him in a runoff election. Roy Evans. Then we'll take a mediocre deadball hurler here in Evans. This guy is a mysterious figure. Evans basically started his baseball career and his con artist career at the same time. He would agree to pitch with one club after another, getting paid cash in advance. Then he'd just not show up. Owners would place him on the ineligible list, but he kept charming his way back in. He also had non-baseball cons going on at the same time. He was indicted in several states for passing bad checks, stealing women's jewelry, and paying bills with worthless IOUs as he traveled the country. And in 1915, he possibly faked his own death. Evans had police, Pinkertons, and bail bondsmen trailing him until August of 1915, when he supposedly became one of the 400 people who died during a hurricane in Galveston, Texas. But this was perhaps another con. He was listed as a survivor in both the September 1915 obituary of his sister and the 1917 obit of his mother, although neither list his residence. Then, in 1920, the Dallas News reported that a man named Robert Roy Evans was sentenced to 2 years in prison for bigamy. The man had allegedly married 3 different women in the previous year. Sure sounds like our boy. This Evans told a reporter that he was a 48-year-old major leaguer. Okay, close enough. From Emporia, Kansas. Okay, yeah. Who had played for Washington, Detroit, and Brooklyn. 2 out of 3. Probably the same guy. He served 19 months in Leavenworth, and then no one knows what happened to him after that. Bullpen. We're going with a 4-man rotation, so we're going to take 2 swingmen in the pen, both of whom are convicted murderers. Dan Serafini. Serafini was a replacement-level swingman for 7 seasons, but things went south financially in retirement. Let's let this episode of Bar Rescue about Serafini's bullpen bar in Sparks, Nevada give you all the backstory you need for his motive.
Desperate for a new career after losing his $14 million fortune through a series of bad investments and a bitter divorce settlement, Dan convinced his parents to take out a $240,000 loan against their house to buy a bar.
So this guy was super in debt, but his wife Erin's parents, Gary Spoor and Wendy Wood, were loaded. So Serafini shot and killed his father-in-law and shot his mother-in-law in the head multiple times. She survived, but would commit suicide 2 years later. This one's got a real tabloid fodder vibe. Wendy would become suspicious of her own daughter's involvement and write her out of the will. There's also an affair, an open marriage, an accessory to murder, and a civil case brought about by Erin's sister against her and Dan for wrongful death. Just a story tailor-made for Dateline NBC.
It's like you're seeing the whole play from these security cameras.
Oh, yeah, well, there you go. Serafini would be sentenced to life in prison without parole, and no charges were ever brought against Erin. Sergio Mitre. This is a disturbing one on many levels. First and foremost for the heinous nature of the crime, but also for the ineptitude of police and forensic investigators. The righty swingman for the Cubs, Marlins, and Yankees was sentenced to 50 years in prison in Mexico for the murder of a 22-month-old girl. On July 12, 2020, Mitre and his girlfriend, Liliana, took her unresponsive daughter, Inez, to the ER, where she died 20 minutes later. Doctors were alarmed by signs of child abuse, including raccoon eyes and multiple bruises of various colors all over her body. Mitre and Liliana were questioned by police separately, and according to Liliana's lawyer, she was tortured by police to implicate Mitre. The police allegedly did a sort of waterboarding technique, putting a bag full of salsa and hand sanitizer over her head. She would be charged with murder. Meanwhile, Mitre was arrested for murder as well as rape, a charge that was later dropped after the autopsy showed the girl had not been sexually assaulted. Now, if you read about this case on an English language news site, they generally say that Mitre was convicted of rape and murder. But Spanish language news sources I found say that the rape charge was dropped and he was just convicted of murder. Not sure why there's that discrepancy out there, but just thought I'd point it out. The police built their case with the help of a guy with no experience as a forensic expert, and by all accounts, the autopsy was flawed. The crime scene, Mitre's apartment, was contaminated by police, who even stole things from the apartment. They were never able to determine the exact cause of the child's death, only that the child received a very strong blow, leading to hypovolemic shock, which is severe fluid loss. Even though Liliana was still refusing to point the finger at Mitre, independent forensic experts were brought in by Liliana's lawyers, and they started delving into the player's dark past. The first thing they discovered was a 2019 video of a naked Mitre chasing down a naked woman in a hotel hallway, dragging her back into the room. Mitre had spent 4 days in jail after that night as he was charged with domestic violence. The case file states that the woman was threatened by Mitre with a knife, that she was pregnant and forced by him to have an abortion, and that she was beaten, strangled, and raped. She suffered a broken nose and a sprained neck. They also obtained a statement from Mitre's ex-wife, who said that Mitre beat her, causing her to miscarry. She also claimed that he beat one of their 2 dogs to death in front of her and their 2 children, whom he also abused. On one occasion, he dragged his son down the stairs by his hair, an event witnessed by Mitre's own mother and one of his sisters, who, guess what, he also allegedly beat. The ex-wife reported him for domestic violence to San Diego police in 2016. Liliana eventually agreed to stop covering for Mitre after hearing all this history. She would state that Mitre beat her and her daughter on many occasions. She said that after she had left Mitre alone with Inez, the girl had woken up the next day with dark raccoon circles under her eyes. Liliana was pregnant at the time, and Mitre wanted her to have an abortion. With Inez constantly asking for water and vomiting, Mitre kept the girl from Liliana and said he would not let her see her daughter until she took the abortion pills, which he eventually forced into her mouth. Inez died the next day. Liliana would be acquitted and Mitre found guilty. Ugueth Urbina. Urbina will be our closer. This guy was pretty phenomenal for the Expos in the late 90s. Urbina would be convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 14 years in prison in Venezuela after a 2005 incident where he, among others, assaulted a number of farm workers on his property with a machete, accusing them of stealing a gun. Allegedly, he also poured gasoline on them and tried to set them on fire. Rick Camp. Rick Camp was a pretty great reliever in 1980 and 81 for the Braves, before becoming an okay swingman for a few years. But he's most known in baseball for his hitting. Camp has his own eponymous baseball game. We're gonna get to the crime stuff, but this game is just incredible. A 19-inning, 6-hour slugfest that featured 2 rain delays and Keith Hernandez hitting for the cycle. Sort of a monkey's paw wish come true for Keith. He hits for the cycle, but only because the game goes into extras, and then just mercilessly keeps going. This game is a high point of Keith's memoir, If at First, that I talked about in the Cocaine Guys episode. The Mets take a 7-4 lead into the 8th when Jesse Orosco gives up a single followed by 3 walks. Then Doug Sisk comes in and gives up a bases-clearing double to Dale Murphy. The Mets tie it in the top of the 9th on a Lenny Dykstra infield single, and then they go up by 2 in the 13th. But with 1 on in the bottom half, Terry Harper hits a 2-out, 2-strike homer to tie it. The teams trade goose eggs until the 18th, when the Mets scrape out a run in the top half. Reliever Tom Gorman, aka Gorfax, entering his 6th inning in relief, gets the first 2 batters quickly to bring up Rick Camp, with the Braves all out of pinch hitters. This game was as over as a game could be. Not only is it the pitcher batting, it's a relief pitcher. A relief pitcher with this career batting line. Gorfax gets ahead 0-2, and Keith says in the memoir that he doesn't even go into a crouch on the 0-2 pitch. He expects Gorman's gonna throw an unhittable ball and Camp's gonna wave at it. Game over.
And he is at the deep left. Heat goes back. It is gone. Holy cow. Oh my goodness. I don't believe it.
Camp's first and only major league or minor league home run sends it to the 19th. As Gorman walks off the mound, he mutters to Keith, "I didn't know Garber had that kind of power." Gorman didn't even know who he was facing. But in all fairness, you can't tell me Rick Camp and Gene Garber aren't basically the same guy. The Mets then bust out for 5 runs in the top of the 19th, and starter Ron Darling comes in to pitch the bottom half. After an error by Keith and 2 walks, Terry Harper singles in 2 to bring the tying run to the plate, and guess who?
It is happening again.
No, actually, Darling strikes him out, and Rick Camp takes the loss in his eponymous game. By the way, this game also took place on the 4th of July. Well, it started on the 4th of July at least. It ended at 4 a.m. on July 5th, and the smattering of fans who'd stuck it out were treated to an intimate fireworks display. Oh yeah, crimes. After baseball, Camp became a lobbyist and was convicted of conspiring to steal more than $2 million from the Community Health Center in Augusta, Georgia via a kickback scheme. Ed Clark. I guess you could call Clark a Moonlight Graham guy, as he only played 1 game in the majors in 1886 for the A's. But he had a pretty wild post-baseball career. He abandoned his wife and family, enlisted in the U.S. Army, and fought in the Spanish-American War in the Philippines. After that, he found work in South Africa as the foreman of a mule transport team. While there, he decided to join the Boer Army during the Second Boer War, and was arrested by the Brits, serving several months in a British prison before escaping and making his way back to the US and opening a bar in San Antonio. You know, that old story. Bench. Catcher, Tacks Latimer. Nickname guy and certified ear guy, Tacks Latimer was a replacement-level backstop at the turn of the century. After baseball, Latimer took a job as a policeman for the Pennsylvania Railroad in Xenia, Ohio, a town you may know as the tornado-cursed setting for the film Gummo. Latimer had what you'd at best call a toxic boss in Lieutenant Charles Macrot. Macrot was so toxic that he was kicked out of the Ku Klux Klan. And Tacks got on this dude's bad side for one reason or another. Macrot threatened to kill him, taking potshots at him on several occasions. When Macrot was forced to step down from his leadership role, he blamed Latimer for making false accusations to get him fired. Macrot then confronted Latimer on the street, threatened him, and challenged him to a fight in an alley. Latimer pulled out a revolver and shot him 4 times in the back. He pled self-defense, but the jury found him guilty of second-degree murder, and he served only about 5 years before being pardoned. Outfield, Farmer Weaver. This guy's claim to baseball fame was being the only guy to ever hit for the cycle with a 6-hit game, way back in 1890, until Ian Kinsler matched him in 2009. In 1909, Weaver's wife filed for divorce, citing abuse and threats to her life. The court found in her favor, but puzzlingly granted custody of their adopted daughter Hazel to him. In fall of 1910, Hazel gave birth to a son. After initially putting out a story of an unknown local boy being the father, Weaver decided to marry the girl, who had just turned 17. But before that could happen, she went to authorities and told them that Weaver had been molesting her since she was 11. He was sentenced to 5 to 21 years in Leavenworth for rape, but was released after just 2.5 years when an old baseball teammate became governor of Kansas and orchestrated his parole. Okay, while we're here, let's just get the last of our pedo guys out of the way. Sadly, I could probably do a whole roster of pedo guys, as there are a number that didn't even make this roster. But I'm not doing that. Although I do have a good thumbnail for it. He was the best baseball player in the state of New York, you know. Outfield, Dustan Mohr. Another Chad Curtis, Mel Hall type who got work in retirement as a youth coach and took advantage of a 14-year-old girl. He pleaded guilty in 2023 to child solicitation, child seduction, and sexual misconduct with a minor, and was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Outfield, Frank Delahanty. Frank was one of the worst of the 5 Delahanty baseball brothers. Actually, there was a 6th who never got out of the minors. Frank went to law school after baseball and then ran for office, getting elected to the Ohio House of Representatives and immediately becoming a criminal. Funny how that works. Less than 3 months into his term, he was accused of bribery and influence peddling. He had allegedly solicited a $2,500 bribe in exchange for passage of a bill. He would be convicted but would not serve jail time. That would come later, after he got into the bootlegging business during Prohibition, and would serve a year in prison for transporting a truckload of beer. After his release, he was immediately busted again for bootlegging and turned state's evidence, snitching on 2 of his business partners. By 1930, Frank was living in a Cleveland flop house with his brother Jimmy, but was able to put his life back together. He still had connections at City Hall and got employment there, eventually working his way up to supervisor of city streets. Outfield, Gates Brown. Talked about Gates Brown in our I Think You Should Leave Guys episode due to his hilarious hot dog double story. But Gates had a similar trajectory to Ron LeFlore. Brown got into trouble with the law at age 18 when he was busted for breaking and entering and sent to Mansfield State Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio. You know this place as the shooting location for Shawshank Prison. This was where Brown's baseball career began. A guard who coached the prison's team wrote to several major league teams to try and get a scout to come take a look at Brown. The Tigers sent multiple scouts to see him play and were so impressed they helped him to get paroled a year early. In 1963, Brown would get called up, and in his first major league at-bat, he'd smash a 400-foot pinch hit home run. Fitting, as Brown would go on to become the American League pinch hit king with 107. Shortstop, Sam Crane. Then we'll take this dead ball shortstop who can also back up third and second. He couldn't hit, but was thought of as an excellent fielder. While playing with the minor league Reading Keystones in 1927, the married Crane became smitten with a young woman named Della Leiter. My man was down so bad that he turned down a 1928 contract to play for the Buffalo Bisons to stay in Pennsylvania with her, giving up on his baseball career. And he set up an apartment for her, mortgaging his mother's house to do so. But the feeling was not mutual, and she broke it off and started seeing another man. This set him off on a drinking binge, and his wife divorced him. One day in 1929, a hammered Crane walked into a saloon in Harrisburg and shot and killed Miss Leiter and her new boyfriend. Crane was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 18 to 36 years. Pearce Chiles, utility. Pearce Chiles, hilariously nicknamed What's the Use?, played for just 2 years for the Phillies in 1899 and 1900, and was less known for his play and more known for his shocking sign-stealing exploits. Chiles would have an accomplice sit behind the center field fence with a spyglass and relay what pitch was coming via an electrical signal over a wire that extended from center to the third base coaching box. Chiles would receive a shock and then signal the batter what pitch was coming. The first game they tried this, the opposing team, the Reds, noticed Chiles' leg had an odd twitch whenever he was coaching third. The Reds shortstop Tommy Corcoran stopped play and went over to third and dug up the buzzer device. This gives you a sense of Chiles' con man nature and his ineptitude. He had a lot of nerve, but he wasn't terribly clever with his schemes. And he would get busted alongside an accomplice attempting to run a con during a train ride in 1901. He wrote this letter from jail to an old baseball friend telling the story of his arrest. And as you can see, he was not a man of letters. He was sentenced to 2 years in Huntsville prison in Texas, but escaped after 16 months. While on the lam, he had the audacity to join the Natchez Indians of the Cotton States League in 1902. In 1903, he popped up in a small town in Northern California, playing for a semi-pro team, and that's the last anybody ever heard of him. All right, that's our Criminal Guys team. Let me know who we missed here, and as always, please like and subscribe for more guys.
Yeah, guys.